And we're live.
Well, hello and welcome to our Voting Rights Roundtable in Livonia, Michigan, right here in Michigan's 11th District. This is the headquarters of my congressional office. I'm Haley Stevens, the Member of Congress for Michigan's 11th District, which includes Livonia, Canton, Plymouth, Northville, and then up into Oakland County, Novi, Milford, Commerce, White Lake, Waterford, Birmingham, Troy, and Clawson. We're an incredible district with the country's most robust automotive supply chain and an incredible workforce. And today we're here talking about an exciting topic, voting rights in America. And it can be an exciting topic, and it can also be a challenging and complicated topic. And so we have the privilege of being joined here today by our fabulous Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, who is a leader on voting rights issues, on the electoral process, so we will be hearing from her. I'm joined by Nancy Wang, from the Executive Director for Voters Not Politicians. She's going to be explaining to you a little bit about what that initiative has been responsible for and is up to today, as well as Sharon Delante from the ACLU, a voting rights strategist. And I'll just say this, we, in November of 2018, had a pretty big election. We had a lot of people turn out to vote. I think about this quote I read just before this forum began, which is, "A man without a vote," this is from LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, "a man without a vote is a man without protection," or a woman, a person without a vote. So we know how important the right to vote is and what this means for us. And I do a lot of that during campaign season, talking to people, asking them if they're getting out the vote. But now as a member of Congress, I take on this responsibility of partnering with our state government, our local electeds, in terms of making sure that people have those protections. The other exciting thing that happened in November of 2018, a midterm election. So we had a U.S. Senator running for re-election, you had Haley Stevens running for Congress. We had, in Michigan's 11th District, that represents about 700,000 people, just a little over 700,000 people, we had the 9th largest voter turnout in the country out of 435 congressional seats. We also had the 4th largest youth voter turnout. And maybe that was because of some of these ballot initiatives that were on our ballots in the voting booths, as well as the energy and the work that we put into getting out the vote. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to pass this over to my panelists, have them introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their organization, their background, what they've been working on, and then we'll dive into some questions. We're also joined here today by fabulous students, seniors from Farmington Public School. We know that our students are going to ask some of the best questions, and we also know, as we were just saying, that democracy is best when it is exercised. So we are so thrilled to have our AP government students all across Farmington Public Schools here with us today. Nancy?
Thank you so much. My name is Nancy Wang. I'm the Executive Director of a grassroots group that formed in just 2016 called Voters Not Politicians. And what we did was we came together around one issue, which was to end gerrymandering in Michigan. As you guys might know, Michigan has some of the worst gerrymandered maps in the country. That's why they're all kind of convoluted looking. And what was happening was that our politicians were working behind closed doors to kind of draw them in a way to assure that they would get reelected, but also in a way that really kind of broke communities apart and made it almost impossible for citizens to kind of get their voices heard in government. And so what we did was we were able to kind of, just kind of capture this large swath of people all across party lines, all across the state, who were sick of this and really saw the result being that our politicians were no longer working for us, and that we had to do something to really break apart this system and make it work for us again. So we passed Proposal 2, which is a constitutional amendment that sets up an independent citizens redistricting commission. So now our citizens are going to be drawing the lines in a fair and impartial and completely transparent way. And we're really excited about it. And that commission is forming sort of, really soon. And so that's kind of we're excited to be here, and thank you so much for the invite.
Wait, and I think I have an example of one of these districts here.
Yeah,
This happens to be Michigan's 11th district. And what a little bit of what we're talking about when we say gerrymandering, or how lines get drawn and how it gets confusing. And we see that when you ask people, where do you live? Who's your member of Congress? And they think, well, what line am I actually on? So what you're working on and what you achieved in passing the initiative is a way in which we can redraw these lines. And when is that going to happen?
So the commission is going to form in 2020, and then we're going to get the census data back from the next census, and then it's going to start drawing the lines in 2021, and then we're going to see a whole new set of maps that hopefully will look nothing like this at all, and we're going to use those for the 2022 election.
Excellent. And I'd like to see our students taking notes. Secretary Benson?
Well, do you want to talk about the other constitutional amendment, and then I can talk about what we're doing to implement them both?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me here today, and thank you to all the students and the staff for putting this together, and everyone who's here with us. So my name is Sharon Delante. I am the voting rights strategist at the ACLU of Michigan. The ACLU has long committed to protecting voting rights for years and years. In fact, we're celebrating our 100 years of protecting people's rights, including voting rights, tomorrow down at Cobo Hall if anybody wants to come to a free event. And so what we did most recently in 2018 is we were in collaboration with the NAACP and also the League of Women Voters and many other organizations came together to propose a ballot initiative. So why do we do that? Well, because we had some of the most restricted voting rights in the country up until that point. The vast majority of the country had the opportunity to cast a ballot before Election Day if they so choose. We did not. The vast majority of the country allowed citizens more time to register to vote. We did not. So that means the rest of the country, all those other congressional districts, all those other members of Congress, their citizens had a lot greater access to coming out and making their voice heard on Election Day. So after working for a number of years to work through the legislative process here and being unsuccessful, we decided to go straight to the people. So we gathered all the signatures, and it was successful in putting it on the ballot, and the voters of Michigan chose to grant themselves these new rights. I didn't do it. It was all the voters of Michigan, and it was really robust, widespread support. 80 of Michigan's 83 counties voted in support of these rights. What that tells me is voting rights is nonpartisan, bipartisan, common sense, however you want to describe it. The citizens couldn't possibly think of a reason in 80 out of 83 counties why they didn't want to give themselves an easier opportunity to register and cast their ballot. So I'm really, really happy to be here today because the first election is coming up on May 7th, in which all these rights will be available to citizens, and I'm so excited to see them out there that day. And I know that the Secretary and her staff who are here today have been working so hard to implement all this. I think we're going to see, we saw a great turnout in 2018, of course. You had some rock star turnout here, but I think we're going to see that even at a higher rate. We're just going to see young people in particular and other folks who have not been participating realize there's really nothing in the way anymore. If I am a citizen over 18 years of age living in this state, I can participate. So I'm really excited to see.
I'll never forget on Election Day, I was out campaigning, and I ran into some students at a coffee shop, and I said, hey, it's Election Day, are you going to vote? And they said, well, I don't think we got registered. And my heart sank, and they kind of looked at me and said, well, next time. But now some of these...
Now they really can next time, because now, thanks to the rights enshrined in our Constitution as a result of the Come Up to Vote effort, you can register to vote on Election Day in your local clerk's office and get your ballot right there and cast it. So next time when you run into students at a coffee shop, say, here's where you go to register and vote.
Exactly. Something that your office will really make a difference of. Well, we'd love an update from you and your new role. I know you took office in January. A lot of great commitments made and things that you're actualizing, and we'd love to hear from you from the helm of our Secretary of State's office.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you for hosting this really important conversation, and thanks to all of you for being here. This is, I remember sitting where you sat, and I think the only difference is that I didn't have a panel of 4 women talking, but at the same time, we're at a really unique moment in Michigan, and every single one of you, your voices need to be heard. And you see what happens when they are heard. We take leaps forward. Other states and seeing real progressive changes happening. And that to me is the beautiful thing of democracy, that it is a reflection of all of us. It's a reflection of who chooses to participate, who chooses to access the power that was enshrined with each and every one of you in our Constitution, with the creation of the right to vote. And I'm proud to be a Secretary of State that just works every day with an extraordinary team to actualize that right to vote for all of you. But as the two examples you just heard really illustrate, it's not unless you all engage as well and are empowered that any of that comes to fruition and change happens. So the Secretary of State oversees motor vehicles and voting in the state of Michigan. And so I see myself as the chief advocate for voters in our state, and am so honored to work every day to implement these new constitutional changes to ensure that you don't just have easier access to the vote, to the ballot box, but when you do, you're voting in districts that reflect your community and aren't carved to predetermine outcomes of who gets elected out of them. You get to choose how the districts are drawn and who gets elected out of them. So that's this new era that you're embracing, that we're all in, and that I'm honored to be a part of. And since taking office a little over, almost 4 months ago, now we've been working every day to bring national experts here to Michigan in states other than ours who've implemented a lot of these changes, learn from them. I'm big on best practices and data, and also not reinventing the wheel. Many other states, as Sharon pointed out, have already made it possible to vote by mail without needing a reason, have already made it possible for you to register to vote and vote on election day or at any point up to election day. So how can, and California is another state that has a citizen redistricting commission somewhat similar to Michigan. So my first question is, how can we bring these folks who've already done this to Michigan, where we can learn from them and see the data that's resulted from the changes that they've implemented, but also build on what they've learned, because we're not reinventing the wheel. We have the opportunity to learn from past efforts and build on them to do even better here in Michigan, and that's really my goal. On the voting piece, with the promote the vote amendment to our Constitution, that has created a number of new rights for our voters, whether it's enabling you to register to vote up to and on election day, vote by mail or vote from home prior to election day. You also have new rights to ensure that if you're voting overseas or in the military, you can have that you have a right to receive that ballot and return it on time. And also you have a right to ensure the machines counting your ballots are actually counting them accurately through demanding post-election audits, which our office is also implementing. To do all of this, we've created an election modernization committee, a task force, that brings together people like Sharon, our own resident voting rights strategist, but others, including former secretaries of states and clerks from around the country who have implemented these changes in their states and have navigated through various pitfalls that you could encounter by saying, well, if we're getting more ballots coming in prior to election day, how do we have the tools to count all of them? How do we make sure when you want to return your ballot, you can do so easily, and you don't have to pay for a stamp, that you could go to a vote center or a centralized location to drop your ballot off that's secure. So we're looking into all of those things so that we can ensure that when you cast your ballot, all of these rights are a real thing for you. And then we're also about to begin the process of implementing the Voters Not Politicians constitutional amendment that created our own Citizens Redistricting Commission here in Michigan. And that starts, and possibly one of the most important components of that, although there are really two opportunities, critical moments for citizens like all of you to be a part of this. The first is applying to be a part of it. And if you qualify, if you meet all the qualifications to be a part of it, and there are only a few, just to make sure that you're not a partisan former office holder and a family member hasn't been an office holder, but other than that, you can go and apply, and we're in the process of developing that application right now. The applications will go live later this year, and you'll be able to apply right through our website, redistrictingmichigan.org. My hope is that we have hundreds of thousands of people applying for the 13 slots that go on that commission. The applications themselves will be open and available for about 6 months, and we'll be going around the state. We hope many of you, I hope all of you apply, and I hope you get as many people as possible to apply as well, because that's really what will ensure that the commission itself is representative of the entire state. And then after the commission is seated, we'll select the commission through a randomized process in the summer of 2020. The commission will begin to be seated in the fall of 2020, and then we'll begin the important work of preparing to draw those districts, gathering the data, doing the work in 2021, with November 2021 being the deadline for them to implement their maps. And that's the second really important element of citizen participation, because it's not enough just to say you want to be on the commission. If you're not selected, we want you to still consider drawing maps, submitting maps, being a part of that deliberation process as well. We'll have hearings throughout the state. We'll have opportunities for citizens from all backgrounds to submit maps, and we're looking into ways to create portals for you to have software and data so that you can go to a library or go to our website, redistrictingmichigan.org, and draw your own map for submission. So lots of opportunities, but all of this work, just like it only was all of you and all our citizens that made all of these initiatives happen, it's now on all of us together, but it really incumbent upon our voters to ensure their success. And we're focused at the Secretary of State's office in being a partner to citizens throughout our state to making sure your continued involvement bears fruit.
Well, that's just fabulous, and as you can see here from our expert panel, real leadership matters, dedicated leadership matters that leads to real results for our citizens and for our voters. And I just wanted to ask real quick with our Citizens Commission is, what's the age that you have to be to participate in that? Is it 18?
You have to be a registered voter.
Okay,
So
18.
Yes.
Well, then giddy up. And
But you don't have to have, anyone can submit a map to the commission. So while there's that basic requirement to serve, your service as a citizen continues throughout, so.
well, and it's quite the exercise, right, in terms of drawing these maps and thinking about, okay, each congressional district, and this is national, right? So Michigan, we have 14 members of Congress serving in the U.S. House of Representatives. We have we have 14 and then 2 U.S. senators. This is great. But the complication in terms of how you draw those lines, how you get 700,000 people in those neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community. I love my district, but I also know that the lines could be clear for people. And so in southeastern Michigan, we heard it over and over again. And so we're thrilled with the leadership that voters, not politicians, showed us, and also in terms of our voting rights. Now, this is the 54th year of our landmark Supreme Court case on the Voting Rights Act. Well, for the Voting Rights Act and the passage of the Voting Rights Act. We had the Supreme Court case that in 2013 repealed some elements of the Voting Rights Act. This was legislation that was passed. And it was, what happened is they said, well, some of our data's old. And I just can't help sitting next to a fabulous Secretary of State and thinking about what happened in 2013 in this case that repealed some of the actions of the Voting Rights Act. And look, your member of Congress is on a bill called H.R. 4 that's going to re-implement some of these measures to restore the Voting Rights Act. What did the Voting Rights Act do? It got rid of that poll tax. It got rid of the requirements for the IDs. Just last year, while Michigan's doing all this great stuff, we had another Supreme Court case that ruled, you know what, if someone hasn't voted in an election, and this is a national Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court case that said, if someone's not voting in the last federal election, we can remove them from the voter rolls. We want you to be voting. So that's why we're pushing hard at the local level. We're putting control, as our Secretary of State said, in your hands. But I'd love for you to just chime in terms of how I can be the best partner to you from the federal government and some of our great legislation, like what we did 54 years ago with the Voting Rights Act, and what we're going to do now that we've passed out of the House of Representatives, that first piece of legislation, which was H.R. 1, that's going to complement so nicely what we did with Prop 3 or Proposal 3 in terms of automatic voter registration and making Election Day a national holiday so everyone can get to the voting booth.
Yeah, I mean, the federal government has a very important historic role to play in protecting everyone's right to vote. I mean, if it weren't for the constitutional protection mandate of one person, one vote, we wouldn't have that promise of equality. And because of that, the most important role the federal government can play today is in protections and in resources. And the protections and resources fall really in 3 categories. One is protecting our ability to cast our ballot, so that we protect against states trying to implement restrictions and hoops that we have to jump through in order to register and cast our ballot, but also protections in terms of how those ballots are counted, making sure that we have security measures in place so that we can't have our machines tampered with and our results untrustworthy. But of course, resources as well. It is because Congress passed the Help America Vote Act in 2003 that we had money to update our voting machines, and we have $11 million today as a result of Congress acting to increase security around our machines leading into the 2020 election, which is going to be important. So Congress is a critical partner. The secretaries of state who run elections in every state, we're really the statewide, we oversee democracy, we implement democracy, we are the laboratories of democracy, but Congress really serves as the protectors of democracy, and that's what you see also reflected in the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah, that's exactly what we say in our 116th Congress, that we are the defenders and the doers for our democracy, and I know that's what people asked for when they came to the voting booth in November. They said, we want to restore the trust and faith in our government. Sharon, I'd love for you to chime in here too. I don't know how long you have been working at the ACLU, but in terms of what we saw in 2013 with this repeal of the VRA, maybe even some of the things that you're hearing from people who reach out to the ACLU. You've always played such a historical role nationally, and obviously our fabulous ACLU chapter here in Michigan has done such a rock bet for us.
Yeah, so we were very disappointed to hear that case come down last year, where the court did allow a lot more purging of voters. I'm sure you've all heard that. It's very much talked in the media.
It's the Husted versus Philip Randolph Institute. That's the Supreme Court case.
So out of Ohio, and it was very disappointing, right? It's very disappointing to hear the highest court in this land say, yep, you can push people off of the list. You can delete them from the voter list. Why is that disappointing? Because historically, when the voter then comes on election day to vote and they're not on the list, it becomes this big problem. The person is there, they're saying they're not on the list, there are some rights under federal law, but it just becomes, it slows up the process. There's this confusion and this complication for the citizen, for the worker. It's just not a good situation. And so we were really happy to be advancing Proposal 3 and promote the vote at the time, because the #1 defense against purging is allowing people to re-register at any time. And that's what Proposal 3 said. You will have the right to re-register, to register anew or re-register at any time. The government should not stand in the way of a citizen who's over 18 and lives in another community from being able to make their voices heard. So I think one of the things, to the Secretary's point, the federal government really has an opportunity to create that safeguard nationwide. If citizens everywhere in the country could register at any time, then frankly, bad purging, removing voters from the voter list, wouldn't have much of an impact. I certainly wouldn't prefer it, and I will still fight against it at the ACLU, but it's good to know that you will always have that fail-safe for the voters to get back on the list when they show up and say, it's me, you made an error, here I am, and give me a ballot.
And how many of our students here are 18? Okay, good. Well, we want to make sure you get registered to vote, given if you haven't been registered yet through the new system. But one thing I want to share for those of you who are not yet 18, that has passed the House. Now remember, we passed bills by passing the House and Senate and the President signing it into law. But what we've done in the House, it was an amendment as part of this landmark piece of legislation that we passed in this new Congress, H.R. 1, is we passed an amendment to pre-register 16 and 17-year-olds so that you're already on the path to getting this. So this is to supplement some of the great work that we're doing here in Michigan, and also to encourage and ensure that our next generation all across the country is getting registered to vote. Nancy, I don't want to leave you out of this conversation. All of us remember what Voters Not Politicians did. And it started in 2017 into 2018, and as we start to get ready for 2020 and some of the activism and the ways in which you got those, I think it was 420,000 signatures just to get on the ballot to become a proposal. What's next? How are you getting prepared for this election, and obviously this great partnership in terms of the Citizens Commission and the drawing of the lines?
Yeah, well, we came from nothing, right? We had no money. We met on Facebook. We didn't meet for many, many months.
It's what they call grassroots.
Yeah, it was true grassroots. And what we found, which I think is really exciting, and we kind of saw this all across the country, but certainly in our case, was that we had people just kind of come together, and we wanted a nonpartisan solution that worked for the people. And, this message just resonated, right? Like, no matter what party you're in, we saw that there were a lot of barriers in place to keep people from voting, to keep their voices from being heard. And so I'm really encouraged that these kinds of grassroots, citizen-led initiatives are really getting kind of traction, and I see more and more of that happening in Michigan, as well as in other states that we are in contact with. So for Voters Not Politicians in particular, we have thousands of volunteers. All of us were volunteers for the first 18 months or so of the campaign, and we are definitely, our focus is to help with implementation. We want to make sure that everyone understands now that this is a completely new day, because one of the things, like, there are practical problems with and I'm hoping will be improved now, but like that we're preventing people from casting their vote. But there's also the kind of like voter cynicism and apathy that comes from knowing that elections are rigged and your vote doesn't count anyway. And it's really hard to argue, well, you should vote anyway, right? Even though like kind of the system is screwed up. So we're really excited to get back out there and say, hey, look, if you take part, your vote really will count. Like, you really can get together with your community and you can elect someone that listens to you, and then when they don't listen to you, you can vote them out. And that's the way it's supposed to work. So we really see ourselves as kind of like a messenger to kind of, explain to people this is how the new system will work now. We have an independent commission. We have people that on the commission that need to work together, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or independents. And they have to draw maps that reflect people's communities. And they have to listen to people as they come and give their testimony and give their maps up to the commission to show where those communities always should have been, but were carved up for political purposes. So we're definitely going to do that from now until 2021. But at the same time, we're looking at other ways that we can help and change the system again, kind of like the fundamental systemic kind of structural problems that we can tackle as the voters to, again, just kind of make it so that democracy works in our favor.
For the people.
For the people.
That's the plan, and I just think that all the volunteers that you got to help collect the signatures and get this through, you're gonna have a lot of people signing up on these submissions, and keep signing up, and we certainly wanna see a lot of great submissions for the maps. What we'd like to do right now is we'd like to open this up to our students who are here for any questions that you might have. I know there's some things we haven't touched on, so those might be on your question list or on your mind, and no question is too short or too long. I mean, we have 30 minutes left, or about 25 minutes left, but give us some of your thoughts, maybe some things that are on your mind. We'd love to hear from you. What I'd like you to do is just raise your hand, I'll point at you, stand up, say your name, where you go to school, all right? Who's got the first question? I know people. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Go on.
Hi, my name is Natalia Camino. I'm from North Farmington High School. I know you kind of touched a little bit on voter registration and pre-registration, but I was just wondering like what efforts you have in like local high schools to register voters throughout the local community.
Well, one of the things I want to do and that I'm working towards is having a national, or not a national, statewide high school mock election. And that would involve every high school having your own mock election in the lead up to perhaps the 2020 presidential. If we're able to get enough high schools to sign on and be a part of it. So if you're interested in helping with that, that would be really great, because it's a great way to just, even if you're not yet eligible to vote in the election, to still make sure your voice is heard and be a part of the process. And in addition to that, we certainly want to do voter registration drives at high schools in conjunction with that. We now have, thanks to the work of Promote the Vote, automatic voter registration. So when you come into our branch office and get your updated license when you turn 18, you will automatically be registered to vote, unless you say, no, please, I don't know. Please don't register me to vote, which we don't know. But that said, this is why pre-registration would be so helpful too, because if you could in Michigan pre-register at the age of 16, you'd be able to, we could do voter registration drives throughout high schools as well. So that's one of the things that I'm very much in support of. So certainly there is no early time, or there's no time you have to wait to get involved though. I remember, frankly, when I was in high school, I was engaged in promoting legislation in my state legislature. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and my parents were teachers, and I saw how they were teaching and working really hard, but principals were making decisions that sometimes didn't take their voices into consideration. So I proposed a bill in our state legislature that every principal had to teach every 4 years to like a class in order to become recertified to be a principal, just to sort of, but and I was not 18 when I proposed that, worked with my state legislature, it died in committee, but that said, it's an example of just how, don't wait for anyone else to tell you it's your time. Don't wait for anyone else to tell you that now you can get involved, or now your voice can be heard. If you have a voice, it can be heard, and it should be heard, and we all will benefit, our whole state will benefit when it is.
Some of us were talking about too the importance of supporting our teachers and strengthening our public school educational system. I can't but help think about the importance of civics and history, what you guys are doing in AP government. We obviously had an earth-shattering moment as a nation at the top of 2018 when our students in Parkland at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas experienced horrific gun violence. And I know as a member of Congress in Michigan's 11th district, I hear from parents, I hear from students, and they just say, this is enough, what are you guys doing? And we passed HR 8, the Universal Background Checks bill. But one of the things that we saw coming out of this horrible incident, I was in high school when Columbine happened, it's because of the civics education, this hands-on approach to government. We saw students getting involved like never before. And in Bloomfield Hills, we had a group formed called Engage 18 that got students registered. We had student-wide town halls. That's part of the reason why it was so important for us to have you guys here. So great question. I think you gotta keep asking the question and also respond to the secretary's charge around.
Can I just add to that about
please.
civic participation also? Like, get involved in a group, right? Like, voters on politicians. Like, when we started, everyone was telling us, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. We're not experts, we've never run a campaign before. And you can figure it out. Like, if you get together, there's groups that are doing all sorts of stuff in your local community, for example, or on a national level, whatever really you care about, like, you can make an impact. In our campaign, we always said, people they gave what they had, and it all makes a difference. So please get involved.
Yeah, I would just think about anything, large or small, that you want to change, whether it's in your school, in your community, in your state, in your country, and then work to change it. That's it. That's what democracy is meant to do. And whether it's partnering and collaborating with other students, other schools, other people, other organizations, or whether it's working on social media, there are various different paths, but the begins with saying, what impact do I want to have? What do I want to see change as a result of my voice or my work? And then working strategically to make that change happen. It's the only way anything ever does change. That's what both of these campaigns illustrate. And our Congresswoman as well, deciding, you know what, I'm going to run. No one's going to tell me no. This is what I feel called to do. This is what I feel I have a unique role to play. And she charged forward, and now she's representing us all in Congress. So, I think that illustrates how all these stories illustrate that don't let anyone tell you no. Don't let anyone tell you you have to wait. Don't let anyone tell you it's too soon or you're not old enough. Your voice needs to be heard, and we will all, as I said, be better for it when it is.
All of that fire in your belly. Sharon, I'd love for you to chime in too. I know we got another question, but I want Sharon to chime in because here's the thing. ACLU is so important and partners with students that you form these cases. So I just want you to share a little bit about how we work with the ACLU.
Yeah, so one of the things I would just add in here, especially when you talk about registration in high schools, is one group, an important group, not necessarily represented here at the table, is your local city or township clerk. So let me be the first one to start beating the drum of the message that I will be beating from now until 2020. Your local city or township clerk in whatever city you live in here in the state of Michigan is primarily responsible for administering the election. Secretary has an enormous role and influences an enormous amount of what happens on election day, but the person who actually runs the show in your city or township is the local clerk. Why is that so important? The ACLU wants to, number one, educate folks about how that elected official right here in your community is a resource for you. You could contact them and say, we would love for you to come to our high school. What local clerk wouldn't want that invitation, right? But on the other side, you can develop a two-way relationship with that local clerk and start to ask them, how are they going to be implementing Proposal 3 in 2020? How are they going to be meeting the additional demand of all the Farmington High School students coming to vote on election day, or in a university community? How do we get a location on campus? These are things that your local city or township clerk, for you all here, but everybody watching, they are the ones to be communicating with. They are the ones that can have an enormous role in how robust the rights under Proposal 3 will actually live. If thousands of people were showing up at a clerk's office and that clerk wasn't prepared for that kind of demand, to be honest, we'd have a problem and it'd be really hard to get them the rights that they want for themselves. So now is really the opportunity to form those relationships and start asking, what is the plan? How can I help you? Can I be a poll worker so that you have all the people you need? What can I be doing to educate people now so that there's not as many people coming on election day and more people are handling it, 10 days before? So that's a crucial other relationship, I think, and the ACLU is launching actually tomorrow a clerk engagement toolkit that you can find online that will give you instructions on how you can do this. As the theme has been here, you don't need the ACLU to do it for you. They are your elected officials and you can have that relationship directly. We'll happily provide support if you need it, but go forth on your own.
Okay, next student question.
My name is Rhiannon Malai from Farmington High. This is probably like 20 steps in the future to what you're like working on now. But I was wondering, when you figure out like the new districts, how are you gonna go about like incumbents and figuring out like how like those elections are gonna go?
Well, for Congress, you don't have to live in the district, in a congressional district, and so anyone can run as long as you're a resident of the state of Michigan. You do have to be a resident of your legislative district for the legislative districts in the Senate, and that, frankly, in the state Senate, and that, frankly, is one of the factors in when elected officials are drawing their districts that is considered. That doesn't necessarily, or probably won't be considered by citizens drawing districts. And interestingly, when California did this about 10 years ago, both the Republican and Democratic parties did not like the maps because they didn't protect incumbents, and they put incumbents against each other, particularly, and again, because, Congresswoman Stevens it's probably best that the Congresswoman lives in the district that they're representing, right? But it's not required. So that said, you may see at the state level, at the federal level, people being in the same district, and that's not the first time. It's happened often every time districts are drawn, but I think we will probably see it happen more than it has in the past, because incumbency protection likely will not be a factor in the drawing of the districts when citizens have the choice.
But guess what? It's not about me. It's about you. And it's about our communities, and it's about a fair and open and transparent process. And I got a lot of jobs to do. One is to run a great district office like what we're doing here in Livonia, do the right thing in Washington, D.C. When I go onto the House floor of Representatives and I place that vote, I get a voting card, and it's my vote for the 700,000 people that I represent, and it's how does this affect people? What does this mean for our district? What does this do for our country? And then when it becomes election time, right, I'm asking for votes. And that's why this isn't about me, it's about you. That's why democracy is best when it is exercised, when we have people running, when they self-select and say, gosh, there's something I care about, I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring. You never know until you try. Okay, we had another, did you have one come on? Yeah, great question.
My name is Jocelyn Benson, and I'm a resident of Farmington High School. And I had a question about the considerations for educated voting. What I've heard you guys talking about is how you can get everyone to vote, but I know the forefathers of this country wanted everyone to be educated when they're voting. That's why some of the blockades to actually voting exist. So,
well, yeah, I always say we need to have an informed and engaged citizenry, and how we get access to information as citizens and making our own decisions is just as critical, and making sure that information is reliable. And that's why, frankly, disclosure of money in politics is also really important, because the money that goes into communications, whether they be ads or other types of ways of voters getting information and hearing about candidates, can impact the message you receive. And so knowing where that money's coming from, and a lot of the work that you've done to push for that disclosure is critical. And so it is multifaceted, but you're absolutely right. Citizens must be engaged, able to cast their ballot, but also have access to reliable information so that you can make your own decision about how you want your voice to be exercised.
I mean, the only thing I'll add to that is the ACLU nationally has been working really hard to educate voters in advance of our presidential primary process about civil liberties and how different candidates, what their views are on a particular area that is of concern to the ACLU. You know, it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for us to try and educate voters on every issue under the sun, but what do we know about? We know about civil liberties and civil rights and voting rights and other issues of that nature, and so we are operating a nationwide actual effort called Rights for All that's focusing on, you know, what can we educate folks about. But I think you're really right, making sure that citizens have more information about the positions that their officials are taking so that they can choose and make an informed decision at the ballot box.
And that's actually one of the projects that we have kind of in process right now is making a democracy scorecard for our state legislators.
I'm Danielle Goldberg, and I go to North Farmington High School. In this past 2018 election, a lot of our local precincts ran out of ballots, and my mom was one of the poll volunteers at a local precinct, and she said people, though they were guaranteed a vote if they were in line by the deadline, they had families that they had to go home and feed. So how can, I know this is also addressing the city clerk's issue, but how can resources be distributed to make sure that they are accounting for the incredible voter turnout like we did this past 2018 election?
A number of things. One, what you saw specifically in the 2018 primary where ballots were, or ran out of ballots in parts of Oakland County, including this community, was a result of really not anticipating the need, having a number of ballots that were spoiled and then unusable, and so they had to be removed. But then also, you didn't have a process in place for what happens when you start to run low on ballots, which is one of the, in that specific example, how to fix it moving forward. Making sure that by 10 a.m., I mean, it's not hard to predict if you're going to run out of ballots by 3 p.m. based on turnout between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. So having a process in place of who you call and having the county clerk know exactly what their process is and getting ballots printed and delivered. There was none of that in place, and so it was a failure on multiple levels. And at the statewide level, we're working to make sure that we're there as a partner to implement those processes with better training for our clerks and our poll workers. But it is a partnership with our local elected officials and our poll workers who are the ones who are on the front lines who are going to make that call to say we're about to run out of ballots. Now, other states, like Colorado, have implemented changes to avoid this altogether. In Colorado, for example, they track this, but every voter receives a ballot to your home, and you can decide how to return it, whether you return it by mail, whether you return it in person on election day, but it's your ballot. And it has a barcode so that we can track it and make sure that no one else takes it or returns it on your behalf, and you get a text when it's been counted. So, you know, that's the direction a lot of other states are going in. We're a few steps behind that here in Michigan, but at the very least, you can see that those are other ways in that particular issue's been solved.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is that's such a great example of how, like, the pre-planning and just the management of the process can actually impact whether or not people have their rights. And I know this isn't quite as splashy as voting rights, and I love to talk about the more splashy stuff, but half of my work over all the years has really been much more focused on that management piece and that pre-planning. And so I know that the advisory committee that the secretary set up has been really trying to get into the details of how will the process change for those local officials managing their elections in 2020? How many more ballots will they need before election day, so that those kinds of problems, and even if you make a prediction and then that prediction changes in the course of the day or the weeks, where have you built in checks on that process ongoingly, you know? And I had the same sort of experience of folks calling and saying, I'm here, and I know they say I can vote, but I'm here with a baby, and I don't have a diaper bag, and I can't wait 3 hours, right? And so what's unfortunate about that, again, is that's not a deprivation of voting rights in some sort of legal way that someone said you will not get a right to vote. It was a management and a process problem. So I think we can do more, especially with all these changes, to try and predict and plan as best as we can for
some really good, yeah.
Hi, Paul Aaron from Farmington Public Schools, Farmington High School. I was just wondering your take on voter ID laws and how we should protect the security of one person, one vote, and how to make sure that like the person who shows up is the person who's signing the ballot.
We've been tap dancing around, this was your great question too about education, some of the challenges that we faced in the 2016 election cycle. We felt a little bit of the uncertainty of it in 18 as well. We say free and fair elections, and we're continuing to push for that and achieve it in its full force. But free and fair also opens up to some predicaments. Certainly in 2016, we saw the infiltration of a foreign adversary trying to get in the middle of our elections. So we asked this question about education and how do we stay educated? Well, it's through what proven channels? You know, it's been so important for voters, not politicians, the whole time they've been operating to say we are nonpartisan. You know, this right here today, this forum is a nonpartisan forum. You have elected officials, you have nonpartisan entities, and so we want to educate through a way in which we are not trying to influence or sway, which is why it was really important for Secretary Benson as well to mention some of the work that we've been doing on, getting rid of some of the dark and secret money in politics. What you're asking about, which leads to, some of the future question, right? We going along the lines, we're trying to get people access to their ballots. Either they're gonna mail them in or they're gonna, show up. We've got them registered. We want to keep people registered. But the security and the modernization of our elections is paramount. And so in the House, what we've done is we have put into place a piece of legislation that I'm really proud to see on a bipartisan platform that is really going to tackle some of the foreign infiltration into our elections. That's also been in a nascent way included in HR 1. But in terms of what this means for communities, we want transparency and we want that security. So I'm also going to kick this over to you because I know you're on the front lines of it. But such great questions from you guys.
Yeah,
great.
So I think true nonpartisan election administration really is captured by working hard to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. That everything you do, as we've talked about, to expand access to the vote has to be coupled by implementation of protections of that vote and making it harder for anyone to cheat the process. And then the second principle I would apply to that is making data-driven decisions. So where does the data actually show? Because none of us benefit if in any way our elections are not an accurate reflection of the will of the people. And so how do we use data to guide us in how we protect against any type of fraud in the process? And looking at where it's happening and then what are the best solutions to stop it from happening. So with that all said, what the data shows is one, there have been, as we know, attempts to infiltrate the process, and there's a lot of efforts to protect against the security of the process, to protect the security of the process. But what we also know is that it's a lot, that the best way to identify, if we're just talking about the potential for voter impersonation fraud, the best way to identify that someone actually is who they say they are is with their signature. Because it's possible, as some of you might know, to get a fake ID and to impersonate someone. It's much more difficult to forge their signature. And so that said, we have a law in Michigan that says you must show a photo ID, and if you don't have an ID, you have to sign an affidavit saying you are who you say you are. And that signature is what is probably the most secure way, and what the data shows is the best way of confirming someone's identity. So we have that in place, and it's also, frankly, everyone has their signature, and so you with the signature protection and identification process, you don't have the added concern of, well, what if you don't have an ID and what happens then, which has always got to be considered when you predicate access to a fundamental right on any additional pieces as ID requirements do. And so the last thing I'll say on that is, at the Department of State, we provide identification for everyone, and it's important for everyone to have photo ID for lots of different ways. And so we also take seriously our responsibility to ensure every eligible voter does have any identification that they may need, not just to vote, but to travel and all the rest. But again, there's multiple layers to it, but I think to me it always gets back to, are we doing everything we can to make it easier to vote and protecting the process by making it harder to cheat through data.
And not by putting computer chips in you, okay? We don't need to do that just yet. guys have been fabulous. I wanna make sure, I wanna do one last scope. Any other burning questions? I know you guys are the big, bright minds of our future, and, you know, we wanna make sure we get your thoughts included. We're good on student questions? Great.
Well, I have an
Yeah,
ask also.
please.
I would love to come to your school and talk about, or maybe look at implementing either a mock election and some of the other changes, making sure that everyone, because it's great to have you all here, and don't forget that the people who go to school with look to you to really lead the process of engagement. And so I'd love to partner with all of you, come back to your school, talk through all these questions, and make sure, you know, that we're doing everything we can to ensure every student, every eligible voter at every level is engaged. So I'd love to explore opportunities there. And thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. What a great way to spend the afternoon. I like it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.